Hi, and welcome to Reflect Forward. I'm your host, Carrie Siggins, and I hope that you're having a fantastic day. I am very excited to bring my guest to you today, Gabrielle Dolan. Gabrielle can tell a story or two. She is a master storyteller. In fact, she was working at the National Australian Bank, the biggest bank in Australia, and she realized, hey, I'm a really good storyteller. I'm actually leading change management initiatives through telling stories. And after she was passed up for a senior level position within her organization, she said, that's it. I'm going to take a leap and I'm going to go start my own consulting company and I am going to teach people how to tell stories. I'm going to teach corporations, CEOs, business leaders, entrepreneurs how to use the power of storytelling to achieve more success, to connect with people, to build relationships with customers. And she tells a story about how this did not go over well 17 years ago when she started her business and everybody said, "What? Storytelling?" Of course, now we all know the power of using stories to connect with people, to make your customer your hero, to make your employees a hero. And she this is what she does. This is her passion. Gabrielle is also a best-selling author of Real Communication: How to Be You and Lead True. And she has a new book out called Magnetic Stories. And you want to make sure that you go to Amazon and get this book. It's all about how to build brands within your company, to use stories to make your customer the hero. So, you want to be sure to listen all the way to the end of this podcast. It's fantastic. She is clearly a master storyteller. And so you hang tight, and I will be right back with Gabrielle. All right, welcome back, everyone. I have the lovely Gabrielle Dolan with me. Gabrielle, thank you for joining me on the show today.
Thanks, Kerry. I'm excited to be with you.
So tell us where you're joining from, just so everybody knows.
Just so everyone knows, just in case they don't quite catch the accent, which I'm sure they already have, but I am dialing in. It's from Melbourne, Australia. So we are in very sunny summer right now.
It's the opposite of me in Durango, Colorado, where we're in the winter, but I love Melbourne. It's a great city. I've been there a few times, so it's
When
a
was the
lovely
last
place to be.
time? When was the last time you were here?
Oh gosh, it's been I guess it was in 2014. It's the
Okay,
last
so
time I've
not
been in
not
Australia.
too long,
Not too
not
long
too
ago.
long ago. Well,
Nope.
considering we've sort of lost the last 2 years, not too long ago.
Exactly. Just a race. Just a race 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, let's jump into your expertise. You're a master storyteller. So how did you become such an expert in it?
If you ask my friends that I've been friends with for 40 years, they will say you were always a really good storyteller. I think I honed my skills down at the pub, but seriously, I spent a lot of time in corporate Australia. So I spent I was working in one of Australia's largest banks for 17 years and had progressed up the ranks into some senior leadership roles. So one of the things that I was dealing with was leadership. Like, how do you get your team engaged? How do you get them connected to the strategy? How do you get them inspired around the purpose and engaged with the value? So I was facing those real challenges that you face as a leader. I was also in my last couple of roles at the bank, I was in some change management roles. So again, in these big change management roles, how do you get your message across to every single employee around why we need to do this change, and not only why we need to do it, but actually get them to change their behavior because of it, which is sort of what change management is all about. And what I started to just sort of noticed is when I shared a story, it seemed to get the message across better. And not only it seemed to get the message across better, but seemed people seemed to remember it and sort of, almost have that, oh yeah, that makes sense. I never thought about it that way. So I sort of noticed that. And then I actually started to notice that there was some really other good leaders and even presenters that I thought were really good. And what I noticed about them is that they were sharing stories. So that was about 20 years ago, and I started to look around, and there wasn't much talk about, storytelling as a leadership skill and storytelling in business. but I came across a couple of books. One was written by Steve Denning, who was a senior exec at World Bank. He was actually born in Australia, but he lived pretty much all his life in the States. And there was another book by Annette Simmons, and so there was a couple of books about it, and I just sort of started playing with the idea, thinking about it over a couple of years, and then it got to the point where I thought, I think this is a skill. I think it's a real skill leaders need, and it's not as easy as just saying start telling stories. And because I had done quite a bit of leadership design and delivery myself in my roles, I just sort of thought, had this weird, crazy idea that maybe I could leave corporate Australia and start teaching leaders, senior leaders, execs, CEOs, entrepreneurs, whatever, to start communicating and influencing more effectively by sharing their personal stories. So here I am 17 years later, still doing it and still loving it.
So, did you have any inkling that you wanted to be an entrepreneur before you started on this venture?
No, no, not really. I
Yeah.
think it's funny, Kerry, when I actually left corporate Australia, when I say I left, there was a couple of restructures going on and I applied for this really senior role. It was like the head of learning for the organization. And I didn't get it. And the manager who was appointing me, I had worked with for quite a while. And I remember her saying to me, she said, you've sort of been talking about going out on your own and doing this stuff. Why don't you do it? Like what do it now?" And, there was a nice little retrenchment package on the table. So when she said that, I part of me went, "Have I? Have I been saying that?" And I sort of think I had been mentioning it, but it was never it wasn't certainly on my radar all my life to go, "I'm gonna go out and start my own company," and it certainly wasn't, "I'm gonna start my own company on storytelling," because, 17 years ago, people were just literally laughing at me, go, "Storytelling in business? Like, what are you mad? What are you talking about?" But, now it's rightly recognized as an absolute leadership capability, so all good now. Wasn't so great 17 years ago, I tell you that, Kerry.
Well, this so resonates with me. I was just having a conversation with one of my senior executives, an engineering type. And we were talking about how to find his authentic voice to be more inspiring. And I told him, I said, you just want to tell the facts. And that's great. But you've got to weave the story into it because otherwise it doesn't resonate with people. People, even engineers, want to be inspired. And you can only do that through storytelling. And he just had his eyes kind of like open at me like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but I have no idea how to do this. So, what advice would you give him to go from, okay, I have an engineering, very logical, very efficient way of communicating to being able to tell a story?
Mm. Kerry, there's a couple of things to unpack there, but so first of all, let me think. A lot of people, when you suggest storytelling in business and even sharing personal stories, it's like this horror on their face. And it's I think a couple of things. They don't even understand why that would be relevant and they don't know how to do it. So that then becomes a fear because if I don't know how to do it properly and I do it, it's not going to work or I'm going to look like an idiot or a fool or whatever. So that's a genuine reason why people don't do it. I also do a lot of work with engineers, and it's funny. It's the people that bring me into the organization. So it might predominantly be the CEO that brings me in, or the head of internal comms, or the head of HR or P&C, and they will say to me, now these are all engineers. Okay, so they're all very logical people. And I go, that's good because what I do is I actually take people through a very logical process, but at the end pops these stories. So part of like you do have to train people. And I might be a little bit biased in this because this is my job to train people how to do storytelling. But when I see companies expect their leaders to be better at sharing stories and they go, we want our leaders to share stories to bring our strategy to life, to, embed our values and bring them to life, but they don't teach them how to do it. I think that's really irresponsible because what it does, it actually sets them up for failure as opposed to setting them up for success. And you'll have, like your client, they will do it once and it won't work. And of course it won't work because they haven't been told how to do it, and therefore they never do it again. And it won't work because perhaps they're sharing a story that's too vulnerable or it's too inappropriate. They're going way too long. So that's one of the common mistakes. People just go way too long when they share stories in work. They become really directive. So they end their story with, so the moral of the story is, when you shouldn't be telling people what the moral of the story is. You should allow them to get it. And it's just, I think there's this reluctance to go, why would I share a personal story to get my business message across? I don't even understand that concept. No one would be interested in. But it's like you said, you can have all the facts and figures and data and logic, which you still need, you absolutely need, but it's through the story. People will not only connect to the message, but they connect to you as the storyteller. And that there's some amazing research and science behind that. So, as a leader, you're not only getting your message across, but you're actually strengthening the relationship with your people. It's like, that's win-win.
Yep, absolutely. Well, how I helped him was I said, let's start with just sharing the why. Right. Let's find the compelling why and the what are the trade-offs and what are the things that could happen. Like you could still have the climatic, right? Still follow the hero's journey, even if you don't want to get personal, right? And that's part of his thing is I'm a very private, personal person. So I said you can still use stories. So how about you build the why? Like let's build a compelling why around this. And so as he practiced it, it was like, okay, I can see this. I can see this because this is actually information that I would want to have too, and how it's going to connect to our customers and then to, our customers winning and then what that means for us. And so that's how I worked with him on that story to make it maybe a little bit like safer dipping the toe in the water of this whole idea of storytelling where it doesn't necessarily have to be personal, but it can still be compelling because it creates a vision for where you wanna go.
Yeah.
So,
And
I
Kerry, I think one of the things, and one of the things I really emphasize when I work with leaders is when
Mhm.
I say personal, it's not your deepest, darkest fears and
Right.
secrets and like being all vulnerable. It's not that. In fact, we don't need to go there. And so when you will have people go, I'm very private. It's when I say a personal story, it's just something that didn't happen at work. And, so say for example, I was working with a CEO actually, and one of the messages he's wanted to get across, it was all around the company messages, why, part of them was giving back and supporting, the community. And he was really passionate about that. It was one of the things he was really driving. So I was helping him find his stories. So I just sort of started with things like, why is that so important to you? Like,
Mhm.
why is that really important to you? And guess what? They tell a story, and he'll
Yeah.
go, oh, but growing up, we would always, my mum, and I go, tell me more about that. He goes, oh, I remember mum. Every time someone was sick in the community, in the street, she would always make a casserole, and I still remember me and my other brothers and sisters walking to the person who was sick or whatever with all this food, and he's just telling a story naturally. And so I go, well, why don't we share that story? And so it's finding these stories to prove that this isn't just a company value. This isn't
Yeah.
just, the corporate line I'm spinning. This is really important to me. And it's important to me because I was raised this way. But it's you can't just say that. Like you got to share the story. Like I
Yeah.
remember when I was a kid, every Friday, mum would make us drag us along to deliver casseroles to all the sick people. But it shows that this is really important to him. And it's a story. It's a story about his mum. It's like the mum's the
Yeah.
hero in the story. He's not the hero. The mum, and that's one of the tricky bits where you can't be the hero in the story. Someone else has got to be the hero in the story, because if you're the hero, it just sort of feels like you're bragging, and that doesn't work either.
Yeah. Well, and that's so true in even in marketing, right? In branding. I always tell my marketing team, we're never the hero in this story. Like companies make the mistake when they say we're the hero and look at what we did for you. No, you want to make your customer the hero. You're the guide. You're guiding them through this. So that really resonates with me. Is that the kind of advice you give on
Yeah.
personal branding or
Yeah.
marketing and branding?
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that you've said make the customer the hero, I want to share an example or a story
Yeah.
with you. My latest book, all my previous books have been for leaders, like, Stories for Work was about how you as a leader share your stories to, do change or values or whatever. My latest book, Magnetic Stories, is around brand storytelling, and it's about how to connect and engage with both customers and employees. I had so much fun writing that book because I got to speak to so many companies from around the world doing really cool things with story. And one of my favorites was Columbia Restaurants in Florida. And I don't know if you've ever been, but it's the oldest restaurant in Florida. It's like fifth generational owned, and they use stories so well. And I want to give you a great example of a
Yeah.
customer story where they make the customer the hero. On a couple of years ago on Valentine's Day, they just did a post. It was on a social media, and it was just like Valentine's Day, celebrating, love around the world. And they had a picture of a couple, like, who were pretty old, and they said, this is they named them, and they said, "For the last 72 years, this couple have been coming to Columbia Restaurant to celebrate their wedding anniversary." And the backstory was that they came on their first wedding anniversary, and they came back again on the second wedding anniversary, and coincidentally got seated at the same table. For the next 70 years, Columbia Restaurant have reserved that table for them on their wedding anniversary, and every year they've come. And so the story, it's a brilliant story making the customer the hero, but by default, you're going, "What a really cool restaurant." But that
Yeah.
and so that's a great example of sharing a story, make the customer the hero, make your employee the hero, and just subtle. There's this very tiny, subtle message that reflects well on you as a company and a brand.
Yeah. So how do brands get started? How do companies get started with this? Because I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that they need to be the hero.
Yeah, and I think how you get started, and this is whether you're an individual or an entrepreneur or a small business or a multinational business, the first place is, what is it you want to be known for? Like, to
Yeah.
define your brand. And what I mean by that, there's a whole heap of definitions around what brand is. One of my favorites I came across with brand, it was from Jeff Bezos. He said that uh, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. I've tweaked that because I think what people say about you is they share stories about you. So to me, your brand are the stories people share about you when, you're not around, type thing. And so it's defining what you want to be known for. And ultimately, I think that is the values of either an individual, so your values, or the brand, the company's values. So a lot of companies are good at that. They're going, "No, no, yeah, we've got our values. We've spent the last 18 months coming up with our values, and they've wordsmithed them, and they've spent 6 months deciding whether they call it integrity or they call it doing the right thing." Like, they spend a ridiculous amount of time on deciding what we're actually going to call our values, and then they think that's it. And so the very next step is, okay, so first of all, live your values. That's a bit of a no-brainer. But how do you share stories? So how do you find, so if one of your values is exceptional customer service, well, first of all, do it. Actually deliver exceptional customer service, because that will create stories. So that'll get people talking about your exceptional customer service, but also find your employees delivering exceptional customer service. So look for it, and then share those stories. So share those stories internally, share them in your induction programs, or in fact, do what Columbia Restaurant did and share them externally on social media, but just making the employee the hero, and resisting the urge to bring it back to you, because that will happen by default. So once you've defined what you want your brand to be, I think the next thing is teaching your people about the power of stories and teaching your leaders how to share stories. And then we start this ongoing process of capturing your stories, communicating them, and then creating them. And what I mean by creating them is actually living your values. And then that just it just goes around, and it sort of has this then ripple effect where it's just more and more and more stories. But there's got to be a conscious point to capture and share them at the first point, and then keep it going.
And are there different types of stories that businesses should look at creating?
Yeah, when I started researching for this book, I mapped out the book, why storytelling and all this, and I had a section that was going to be the X number of stories a company, and I had no idea what that X would be. And after doing all the research, they sort of logically fell into about five sort of different buckets. And one is, and they all start with C. They all start with C. So I sort of like that. One is the creation story, and that is your typical, founder story or origin story. And the reason I called it creation, not just to make sure it started with C, although that I must admit, Kerry, that did have something to do with it slightly. But the reason I called it a creation story because it's not just the founder story and it's not just the origin story. It can potentially be how a product started. So if you're delivering a product or a service, how did that start? Why did that come about? Why is that important? So it's the creation. So that's the creation story, which I think captures that better. The other one is culture stories, and this is sort of what I was talking about. How do you get your leaders sharing personal stories about what the values mean to them, and how do you find your employees, sharing stories of your employees actually delivering on those values? So whether it be customer service or risk taking or integrity or whatever. And then the other 3 are customer stories, which we just spoke about, make your customer the hero, community stories. So again, this goes beyond just your corporate responsibility stuff. This is again, are your employees doing some amazing stuff in the community that's got nothing to do with you? Like, did your employees on the weekend go off and volunteer to fight bushfires? If your employees are doing stuff, make them the hero. And again, the subtle thing will be, hey, you've got really great employees working for you. Must be a great company. And then the other ones are the challenge stories. So what challenges have you come across and how did you go about that? When I was researching this book, it was the start of the pandemic. I could have quite easily had another C COVID stories in there, but I think that a lot of them fell into the challenge story. So, and sometimes how you respond to a challenge is sort of showing your values as well. So some stories could be, well, that's a culture story, or that's a community story, or that's a challenge story. And yeah, it could be all 3. So don't get hung up about it. It normally does cross over. So I remember that one of the stories, just to give you an example, Kerry, one of the stories I wrote about in the book came from a gin distillery in Sydney, Australia. And it was literally at the start of the pandemic when we all went into lockdown. This gin distillery had a restaurant attached to it. So they were concerned that they were going to have to let go their 15 employees that were part of the restaurant. There was also a massive shortage of hand sanitizer at the start of the pandemic. So in 3 days, so it was on a Friday afternoon when we went into lockdown, they decided that they're gonna switch making gin to make hand sanitizer. And within 3 days, they had changed all their regulations, they had designed labels, got bottles printed, and within 3 days, they had produced 7,500 bottles of hand sanitizer, and over the next few months went on to produce, hundreds of thousands, and not only save the jobs of their 15 employees, but actually were able to employ another 15 people from the local region who had lost their job because they were in the hospitality industry. Now, that's an amazing, you could, on the surface, that's a challenge story. How did we respond to the challenge? But their values are around community, around quality, and so it's their value story as well. It's also a community story, but also if they keep making hand sanitizer, I don't think they do make hand sanitizer anymore, but if they kept making that product, that's the creation story of that product, which, should be a little story on every label of their hand sanitizer. So I just think that's a really cool story about how we don't need to be hung up on what type of story it is. It's just a great story. So get out there and share it. And, you know, they share that externally, they share it internally. It should be, I hope it's part of their induction program. So when new employees come, they get a sense of what the values are and what the brand is and what the expectations are of them through the stories.
Yeah, that's such a great example. We had something similar right before the pandemic. We had a ransomware attack. So on a Saturday morning, I get a call from my IT team, like, we're shut down, don't know what's going on. And then, a few hours later, we realized, okay, it's a ransomware attack. And we actually found the ransom note. And I called in 25 of my employees on Sunday morning to start to put together a plan of how are we going to get through this and how are our customers not going to feel a thing because it's our busiest time of year and we cannot let them down. And so we put together all Sunday this plan. And of course, we emailed all the rest of our employees saying, hey, there's some things going on. You're not going to have access to email, blah, blah, blah. So by the time, and there's a company meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning. So by the time everybody walks in, they are on pins and needles, right? Because they're like, what's going on? And of course, rumors had happened, gone through. We've been hacked. And, I thought long and hard about like, how am I going to use this? How am I going to do this in a way that is going to let everybody know the magnitude of what we're going through, but inspire people to probably work harder than they have ever worked in their lives. And so, I came in and I told them exactly what happened, and I was dramatic and, about the phone call. And then our attorney says, well, we have a 24/7 concierge service. And it's like, this is not vacation, and then I ended like, and we are not paying the hackers. And everybody stood up and they cheered and we put together this plan, 4 weeks of manually shipping orders. It was literally the most amazing thing that I have ever seen. It, like, brings tears to my eyes just, like, remembering the camaraderie that we had, and I think that that story, not only has it woven into many other things about how we then went immediately into the pandemic and how that endears us to our customers, but in that moment, it was like, I have so many different ways that I can handle this. And I am just going to use a story to tell people the truth, to tell people, like, hey, there's stuff that we don't know and we're going to figure it out, but we're going to get through this and we're not paying them. And I think that was the biggest lesson I had ever learned in telling stories. And I'm a big storyteller too, of just how profoundly motivating that can be because it's what kept people motivated during a really tough time. And
Mm,
so this just completely resonates with me. I love the work that you do because I've witnessed how powerful it can be, how absolutely motivating it can be to a company. And I was just wondering,
yeah.
do you do CEOs see this? Do they understand the power or do you have to convince them?
First of all, Kerry, I'm almost think, there's like a movie in that where you're going, "We will not pay the hackers."
I know. I even
It's
think
like
I
a
threw
bit
some
of,
test jokes in.
like a bit of Braveheart going on. "They will not take
Totally.
away our freedom."
Exactly.
Um, so Kerry, to answer your story, look, seriously, when I first started doing this 17 years ago, it'd be fair to say it was a hard sell
Yeah.
because, you'd be speaking to CEOs and they'd be going, "Well, what, we're bankers or we're engineers or we're blah, blah, blah. We don't need stories." And it was like, but you're trying to influence people and engage people and get your message across and lead a change. Of course you need stories. Even when I go into organizations and run workshops. So I go in and run like, half day workshops or full day workshops. And even though people are in the room, 17 years ago, I would say a third of the people there were going, I so want to learn how to do storytelling. I think it's going to help me as a leader. The other third were probably, I'm not really sure if this is going to be relevant, but I'm prepared to listen. And the other third would be, there is not a hope in hell that I am sharing a story at work, right? So over the 17 years now, I would say that final third of hope in help, I don't think I've come across anyone
Yeah.
like that, and maybe they're there and not say anything, but I think that that is like it's, or, maybe let's say it's 1% now that might think that. And that first third of, I really wanna get better at storytelling, I reckon that's, like, about 80%. now. And you've still got some people that go, I'm not sure. I'm still not sure. What I love, what I truly, truly love about what I do is I can go into a company, I can work with the senior leadership team. Some of them will, at the end of the training, go, you know what? It's just never, ever occurred to me to share a personal story at work, ever. And they're seeing how it, because I get them to share their stories, with their, and they go, "It's so powerful." I go, "Yep, I know." And then what I love is they'll send me an email, a week later or a month later and go, "I shared the story with my team. I cannot believe the impact it had." And they're sort of going, "This really works." I go, "I know, I know." So once once people I do the training that they experience the power of it, because I can get up there and tell them, to the cows come home how great it is, but it's not until they share a story and experience the impact, and when their colleagues share a story and they sit back and go, "Wow, that really connected with me." So once they've experienced the power of it, and I've given the framework to do it, so they've got the capability now and they've experienced the power, so they've got a lot more confidence to do it. And then when they do it, I know when they do it once and it will have the impact, they will then be going, "Right, I'm in." And then they go, "I'm looking for stories all the time." So regardless of what message I'm trying to communicate, I need would a story help me with this? And that's where I ultimately want to get people, is like, you don't need a story for everything. I mean, if you're just doing a project status update, you don't need a story.
Right.
But if you're trying to get your message across where people
Yeah.
really understand it and connect with it, I want to get leaders to the point to say, could I use a story for this? And at least ask yourself that, because, if you don't ask yourself, could I use a story for it? Well, the answer is going to be no. The answer is always no if you don't ask. So it's just prompting them to go, yes, we need the logic. Yes, we need the data. Yes, you need all the facts. No one's suggesting you don't. But perhaps a story on top of that may bring that all to life. And that is what ultimately they'll remember.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. So my keynote, I'm a speaker as well. My keynote is around this whole idea of flawed leadership and why we need to embrace our flaws and be open about our flaws, because that's where people connect, right? Nobody wants to follow a perfect leader. It's not even real, right? There is no such thing. And
Yeah.
I remember the
I just want to jump in there because you said
yeah,
no one likes a perfect leader. It's not real. I have a saying that perfect leaders aren't real and real leaders aren't perfect.
yeah.
So
I
it's
love
just,
it.
I love the fact that you said, yeah.
I'm gonna steal that. It's so good.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
I will give you full credit. No, that's amazing. I am so with you. I have a checkered past. I had a drug addiction that led me to $100,000 in credit card debt and an overdose in 2006. And as I rebuilt my life and started to really understand like what led me to that, which was a lot of imposter syndrome and me trying to hide what I didn't like about myself, I realized, hey, this is something that's really prevalent and really destructive. And I remember the first time that I shared that story with my team. And I was really scared to do it because I thought people were going to judge me, right? Oh gosh, how can the CEO of this company have come from, a drug addiction? And I mean, by the time I finished my story, people were in tears and they were like, thank you so much. And then, they shared a different story and a different one. And the next thing you know, like we're all so connected. And I was literally blown away. I never imagined, I was young. I became CEO at 29. I never imagined that I would, one, have the guts to do that. And two, the profound impact that it would have of me saying, hey, I'm a flawed person. I've done some pretty bad things. This is what it led me to. And look, you can pick up your life and rebuild it and do something amazing. And so I really encourage people to be more open about that, because people do connect with, the grittiness of life. And so many leaders, I think, want to put on that facade of, I don't have issues and I would never share them if I did. And it just doesn't land. It doesn't land with people like it could if you just share those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I love your messages around flawed leadership, because I think leadership's changed, and I
Yeah.
think if there's any leaders out there that are thinking they need to have all the answers, They need to be bulletproof. They need to be right. It is such an old-fashioned concept of leadership, and your people aren't responding to that. There's a whole generation that wanna get involved and stuff, and you've like and so I agree. Showing some form of vulnerability and, I mean, what your story was showing a very courageous story to share, showing a huge amount of vulnerability. But you don't like, I'm saying to leaders, you don't have to go to that
No.
level. You could, but just you can show some vulnerability. And what it does, and what your experience highlights, what exactly what this does, is once you have the courage to show some vulnerability and share a story about that, what two things happen. There's a strengthening of the relationship with your people, but it gives your people permission to say, "Hey, yeah, I'm struggling with this as well." So and that's, the amazing work from Dr. Brené Brown, like,
Oh,
highlights
okay.
that it's, showing vulnerability, is a sign of courage because it takes courage to do it. And, she will say it's the one thing that we're reluctant to do, but when we do it, it's the one thing that people really admire
Yeah.
and respect. And so I
Yeah.
think leaders need to get over this concept. If I show vulnerability, I won't be respected. It will be like the complete opposite. You will increase your respect.
Yeah.
So that's yeah, so well done on you in getting those messages across.
Thanks, thanks. Well, I believe in it. I believe in it deeply because we need leaders who are going to inspire people to fix some of these major issues that we have. And we can't do it if we're just all pretending to be somebody who we're not. So, and I love
Yeah.
Brene Brown. I
Yeah.
love Brene Brown. I am such a
I
Brene
know.
fan. We just did, my whole leadership team just read Dare to Lead and did a big team building around it. And now I'm rolling it out through my company because I think that whole idea of courageous leadership and showing vulnerability, and we all do that through storytelling. It's so important for people to connect, and people are feeling so disconnected these days that we've got to just
Mm.
flip it upside down and really do something different.
Yeah, I think one thing the last couple of years have shown us, because we've been so physically disconnected, how important connection is. And
Yeah.
it's through stories, to me, I come from storytelling from a really practical perspective. Like,
Yeah.
this will help you get your message across better. This will help you get people connected to your strategy and values. But the added benefit of sharing personal stories is we strengthen the relationship, we increase trust and respect. And as a leader, that's what you gotta be doing. And I love what you said before about, we need leaders to inspire people, and that's your job as a leader. To me, it's like, are you a leader or a manager?
Yeah.
Like, and if you're calling yourself a leader and you wanna be a leader, your job is to inspire,
Yeah.
not to, have all the answers.
Yep, totally agree, totally agree. So I'm super curious about your book. So since it's such a different book or has a different flavor, I should say, than your previous ones, what's the most interesting thing that you learned about yourself?
Yeah, God, that's a good question. You're also gonna, talk about everyone else. So let I would say, in writing that, so I talk about vulnerability, I talk about sharing stories. On reflection, and I think this is gonna come out in my next book, is perhaps I don't go vulnerable enough. So it's sort of like, I can share some. I like to entertain as well as educate. So sometimes I use humor as a bit of a way to not go deep. And so I think coming out of that, and it will go into my next book, which, by the way, is years and years away. So, but I'm just sort of thinking, I think I need now to step into, I do practice what I preach, clearly, but I think I could go a bit deeper at times. So,
Yeah.
that's what I learn about myself. I also learn about myself, I can also write while not in planes. So I actually decided to write this book at the start of the pandemic, and it was gonna be perfect time because I had all these. I was, traveling. I was going to New York, I was going to Boston, I was going to London. You do so much great creative work when you're sitting on a plane. Anyway, clearly that didn't happen. But I'm in Melbourne, and Melbourne, unfortunately, has the title of the most days in lockdown. So it's amazing what lockdown does when you can write as well. So
Yeah. And
that
have
was
you
my
always
little that
been
was my little COVID baby.
I wrote a COVID book too. Mine isn't out yet. I just sent it to my publisher. So I totally understand. But I'm curious, did you always know you were a writer? I mean, you have several books and clearly you have more in your head. So, did you know you were going to write?
Kerry, so we're talking about vulnerability. Let me tell you something. I failed English in my final year of school. Like, I don't know what was going on. I failed English, right? I've got school reports saying something around, Gabrielle just refuses to pay attention to basic grammar. So no, I never thought I would be a writer. I remember when I did an MBA, like when I was about 28, I started doing an MBA and I was writing my thesis and I'd get my husband to proofread my thesis, which was a tough job, believe me. But he always would say to me, "You cannot write the way you talk." And I went, "Why?" And he goes, "Because you can't. It's an academic piece of writing. You just can't go, I reckon, blah, blah." And I was like, well, and then my, supervisor was encouraging me to do a PhD, and seriously, the only reason I'd do a PhD is to call myself doctor, but and
No.
I thought I struggled with a thesis, which is, I don't know, 40,000 words. I am not doing a PhD that's 180,000 words, so I didn't, but part of me went, "I might just write a book," and so I did, and the biggest feedback I get now is when people say, "When I was reading your book, it felt like you were in the room talking to me." And so now I write like I talk. So I never ever thought a book if would be in me. When I wrote my first one 10 years ago, if someone had a said, in 10 years' time you would have written another 6 or 7, how many, I just would, no, 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 no. And you're right. Now I just love writing now. I find writing actually really, really creative, and it helps me if I've got an idea and I have to write about it. I sort of have to spend a time developing my idea to put it out there. So to me, it's a way for me to keep developing my ideas and my thoughts, and then just put it out.
Yeah. No, I love that. That's a great story. Well, I'm a writer too. I always knew I was a writer. I debated when I was and graduated from high school, which I was also in trouble in high school, and my mom basically didn't think I was going to go to college, and so I was going to prove everybody that I was. And I decided that's it. I'm going to go to the hardest school in Colorado, Colorado School of Mines. It's an engineering school, and because I was good at math. And my dad said, "Why are you not going to journalism school? You're a writer." I wrote for my high school newspaper and I was like, "Well, because nobody thinks I can graduate from engineering school. So that's what I'm going to do." And of course, I spent 4 years like never writing and getting my engineering degree. And then, here it comes full circle with my dad telling me, "Well, you're probably not going to make it through engineering school." And me being determined I was and prove him wrong. Full circle. It's like, "Oh, I actually am a writer."
I think that's
Uh,
what they call cutting your nose off despite your face.
Pretty much, pretty much. I have no regrets getting an
Yeah.
engineering degree, but yeah, writing is something very tangible for me. Being an executive, I mean, I do just lots of intangible things, meetings with people and guiding and developing and thinking strategy and so writing is like this tangible, I got this done. Where it's really hard to look at the rest of my day and say, "Oh yeah, I can check off all the things that I did." So, I like that piece of it too, is it gives
Mm.
me something tangible to attach myself to.
Yeah. It's funny, Kerry, you said tangible. My mum has never been able to explain what I do to her friends as a job. Like the concept of teaching people storytelling in business. Like she literally, she goes, "What do you mean you have to teach people how to tell stories? Don't they just do it?" I go, "No, mum, they don't." So she's got no idea how to explain. But when I wrote a book, she now can tell her friends, "Gabrielle writes books," because it's tangible. And now they just think I'm an author, which, is one part of my job, I guess.
That's funny. All right, well, we need to wrap things up. I know you have, places to be, so how can people find you?
Oh, look, the best place is, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, of course, but the best place is my website, so gabrielledolan.com. And if you're interested in storytelling, I have like a 7-day storytelling starter kit. It's free. And if you just subscribe, you'll get an email from me once a day for 7 days with a really short video. And it's just a way to sort of help get you started about thinking about the types of stories you could share, where you could share them, that type of stuff. So if anyone's in, it's gabrielledolan.com.
Great, and how about your book? They can get it anywhere? Amazon?
Oh, yeah, get it anywhere, Amazon, all the usual. It's in audio and, Kindle ebook, so just all the normal places you get your books.
Wonderful. All right. Well, and I'll include all that into the show notes as well. Well, Gabrielle, it was so lovely having you on the show today. This was a very fun conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
I did. Thanks, Kerry. Thanks for being part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Hang tight and I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. I hope you enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun for me. I think Gabrielle had a lot of fun. Hopefully, you did too. Be sure to check out her book, Magnetic Stories Connect with Customers and Engage Employees with Brand Storytelling. It's on Amazon. And I look forward to hosting you next week on Advice from a CEO. We've got some interesting topics to discuss. And if you like this podcast, please write a review, rate it, subscribe to it. Check out my new YouTube channel, Carrie Siggins Reflect Forward. I always appreciate it. Thanks so much. See you next week.